Hello and welcome to the 14th video lecture of Marketing Research Module 1 Semester 5. Today's video lecture is going to be the last video lecture of Module 1, and the topic that we are covering is where we had left off in a previous video lecture, that is the research process. An introduction to the steps in the research process has been given in a previous video lecture. Now in today's video lecture, that is video lecture number 14, we are gonna discuss in detail these 7 steps that we had seen in a previous video lecture. So let us begin. Now when we talk about research process, we have 7 steps. These 7 steps have been shown in a previous video lecture. Let us go through these. Step 1. Define your research problem. Step 2. Review of literature, that is, you read something about the problem that you have identified in step 1 and then proceed ahead so that you get some foundational knowledge. Step 3 is formulate hypothesis along with setting of objectives. So step 3 is setting of objectives and formulate hypothesis based upon your objectives. Then step 4 is nothing but preparing the research design. This is basically the heart and soul of your research process. Preparing the research design involves a lot of steps which we'll discuss in detail in the coming slides. Then comes data collection. You have to collect data from the market. Then data analysis. The collected data has to be analyzed properly through a proper technique, and once it is analyzed, you have to interpret these results in step number 7 and write a report and submit it to the management for decision taking. So we shall discuss these 7 steps one by one. Step 1. Define research problem. Now in actual scenario or actual practice, you don't normally have only a problem. Sometimes it may be an opportunity that you have to identify. So this step 1 can be further said that it might be defining a research problem or identification of an opportunity that exists in the market. The first step that we have to do in any research process is identify the problem. What is the problem? And to do this, we need to identify the problem or the opportunity that exists within the organization or maybe outside the organization in the market. The research problem may be something the researcher identifies as a problem. The researcher identifies that there is a problem or there is a knowledge gap that is there, which has to be filled through collection of data. A good research problem should have the following characteristics. It should address a gap in knowledge. There should be a gap in knowledge that the research problem should address to. It should be significant enough to contribute to the existing body of knowledge of the research. This is very important. Just because you are doing a research, this is of no use. It will result in excess or just spending expenditure of time, money, effort, everything without any fruitful results. So if you want your research problem to be something which is of useful to the organization, then you have to have a research problem that should fill some knowledge gap. So once you identify the problem, that is your step number 1, we proceed to step number 2. Step number 2 is reviewing of literature. Now what do you mean by review of literature? Literature is basically some knowledge which has been written or recorded by someone else earlier. So now that the problem has been identified, what is the problem or what is the opportunity, the researcher must learn more about the problem, why the problem exists. Someone might have done a similar kind of a research on the same topic earlier. So what has he done? What are the steps he has taken? What are the data he collected? What was his conclusion? So all these things you can do. To do this, you can approach any library, any research journal, or anything like that. So you can collect data from this and read it, so that it becomes easier for you to gain foundational knowledge about the problem area. The review of literature educates the researcher about what studies have been conducted in the past, how these studies were conducted, and the conclusions and the problem area. Once review of literature is done, we move to the third step. The third step is where your actual research starts with respect to the problem that you have set or identified. So the third step is setting of objectives and formulate hypotheses. You have to set objectives for your research process or research. What are objectives? Objectives are basically goals that you set out to attain in your studies. They inform the reader what you want to attain through the study. So what is basically that you are gonna reach to, or what is the thing that you are gonna do in your research. This is what will be informed to the readers. It is extremely important to word them clearly and specifically. Objectives should be very clear and very specific, without which your entire research process might go haywards. It is something like we can relate it to the train line, that is the railway line. The railway line is your objective, kind of an objective. Objective lays down the path in which your research should be carried out. It will never allow you to deviate from it, and you should never deviate from it also. Objectives listed are mainly of two types. One is the primary objective and the other one is secondary objective. Primary objective is an overall goal that you need to achieve. The main objective is an overall statement of the thrust of your study. Where exactly is your study, or what exactly are you studying? So it is also a statement of the main associations and relationships that you seek to discover in your research. Then we have something known as secondary objectives or minor objectives. Now what happens in these sub objectives or secondary objectives? These are very specific and related to your problem area. These are basically derived from the primary objectives that you have set. The next step is step number 4, that is preparing the research design. Now what are you going to do in research design? We have learnt little bit of research design in our previous video lectures. Three main categories of research design that we have discussed are descriptive design, causal design, exploratory design. So which type of design we are going to follow? Secondly, it is considered to be the heart and soul of your research. Why? Because most of your research work, or how you are going to carry out a blueprint of your research, will be designed in this step. So this is the main part of your research process. Research design step involves the development of a research plan, a blueprint of your research for carrying out the study. There are a number of alternative research designs that we have discussed earlier, and it largely depends, it mainly depends upon what is the purpose of the research, and also on the researcher, which is the one research design that he wants to follow. The types of research design that we have discussed are descriptive, causal, exploratory. Now descriptive, as we all know, that descriptive describes a certain data or describes a certain variable. So descriptive studies are undertaken in an organization to learn and describe the characteristics of a group of employees, maybe sometime, or as for example the age of the employees, the educational level of the employees, the job status of the employee, that is whether they are happy with the job or no, and the length of the service. So all these kind of things, if you're studying, then that becomes a descriptive study, and it is a descriptive design. The second type of design that you can follow is a causal design or a causal study, which is basically a relationship that talks about the cause and effect relationship between two variables. So causal study is an inquiry to know the cause of one or more problems on some other things. The third type of research design that we are studying is exploratory studies. So exploratory studies are basically done to find out something more about a topic, the superficial something things about the topic. It tries to explore a topic so that further research can be done. So exploratory studies are study of collection of data in informal manner and in an unstructured way. In brief, if we want to sum it out, the what research must contain. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind when you are doing a research design. The research design should be clear. A clear statement of the research problem is needed. The procedures and techniques that are used for gathering the information should be laid out. Also, the population to be studied. What is the population that you are going to study, or what is the population of interest that you are going to study, has to be specified along with the population, along with the sample. So you also need to specify the sampling technique that you are going to follow, and the sample size determination, how you are going to determine the sample size. It also decides whether you are going to go for enumeration of the entire population, that is census, or you are going to draw a sample out of it. So it all depends upon what type of design you are going to follow, and all these things have to be included in your research design so that a plan can be prepared. Along with that, we should also take care about the methods to be used in processing and analysis of data. So all the methods that you are going to use, so we are discussing these methods in our coming videos. So all these things, it should contain a research design. So once that is done, that is step number 4, we move towards step 5, that is data collection. Actual data collection, your field work will begin now. So what is data collection? Data collection is collection of raw data from your respondents. So this data can be sometimes primary or secondary. What is primary and secondary? This is covered in second module. So, but just for your knowledge sake, primary data is the data that has been collected by the researcher itself for his own use, whereas secondary data is used by your researcher, and it has been collected by someone else. Now what are the various tools that can be used by the researcher? So we can have questionnaire, that is a printed format of question, and ask him a feedback about various things. So you can go for questionnaire, that can be a tool. You can go for interview. The interview can be telephonic interview, email interview, sometimes online. Nowadays we have a lot of online things going on for interview. It can be a telephonic interview also sometimes. You can get data from collect data from public records and statistics also. Like for example, if you want to know what is the population of a particular thing, a particular place, you can always go to the census, that is the records published by the government. So public records are available, statistics are available, published by various bodies of the government. Historical documents are there, especially if it is an archaeological research, then you go for historical documents, and sources of public information also are there based upon that. Then you have various books, magazines and newspapers, internet. Then you can get data from technical and trade journals also. There are a lot of trade journals which are doing the rounds, so you can use those. Publication of foreign government or of international bodies like IMF. Sometimes foreign government publications also can be used. Sometimes World Bank comes up with a report which you can use for your research data out of those. Then publications of central, state and local newspapers also can be used. So what all publications have been done by various reports that have come in newspapers, so that can also be used sometimes, but care has to be taken to see whether the data that has been printed in the newspaper, magazines or all these things are authentic or not. So that has to be taken care. So authenticity and all, we will see how to check the authenticity of data into next lectures. But you have to check whether it is correct or not, whether the source of the information is reliable or not. So that has to be taken care of. So once data collection is there, what we have to do of the collected data? In step number 6, we do data analysis. So once data is collected, analysis is to be done, but before analysis some filtration of the data is to be done, that is the data needs to be purified. The data that you collect directly from the market is basically a raw data. This raw data has to be filtered. So through various steps like coding, editing, verification, that is validation. So all these things are done, and once you do that, you need to tabulate the data, then you need to calculate charts, sometimes that is you need to draw graphs, and then you have to draw inferences. So data analysis has to be carried out. Suitable technique, suitable method of calculation needs to be used for hypothesis testing. If you're doing whether you are going to go for Z test, a T test, chi-square test, or whatever test you want to follow. So suitable based upon your research requirement, what is the type of test you are going to do, and whether you are going to accept the null hypothesis, reject the null hypothesis. Based upon that, do you need to set up other hypothesis. So that all things you have to decide in data analysis. Once data analysis is done, the next thing is interpretation and report writing. You need to interpret what is your calculation. If you have rejected the null hypothesis, if you have accepted the null hypothesis, what is the meaning of that? So these need to be interpreted, and you have to draw conclusion based upon that. Conclusion is to be drawn. Limitations, very important. What were the limitations of your study? Whether you had time limitations, whether your limitation was about reaching to certain people. So all these limitations of your study, what were the restrictions, or what are the things that restricted you from reaching out to certain things. So all those limitations will have to be enclosed or written it and documented, if any. They must be published, and along with that, a future scope of study, that is what is the scope of the study, that has to be mentioned. Once scope of the study is mentioned, if your research is used by someone else as a literature review, then they can use this research and scope of the future study, and they can do their own study. All the entire data collected and the procedure along with all other steps what you have followed, that is 1 to 7, have to be documented, printed, documented, bound, and submitted to the management, so that the management can take effective decision. So these are the 7 steps that need to be followed in a research process in brief. In detail we are going through one by one. They are included in module number 2 to 5, 2 to 6, in fact 6 modules are there in market research. So module number 2 to 6 discusses entire your research process itself in detail. So with this we end our today's lecture.